The official start of NFL free agency is almost a week has started almost a week ago. Sorry, everybody. The 49ers, how have they improved? What is left to be done? We're going to talk about that and more on tonight's Hammer and Nayls Show. Welcome, everybody. It is Tuesday night, and that means it is time for Hammer and Nayls. I am Jack Hammer, and with me, as always, my partner in crime on this show, the guy that holds it all together, as he pointed out a couple weeks ago, Jessie Naylor from Last Second Sports. Jessie, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Jack. I know we took a week off. I'm happy to be back. Talk some 49ers free agency, man. Let's get after it.
That's right. We haven't had a chance to talk free agency since we didn't get together last Tuesday. Lot started off right off the bat, and you look at what's taking place real quick, though. Before we get into it, I do wanted to shout out a couple folks that are over here. I want to shout out Mariah Faithfully, 49er Faithfully. Hit that like button and subscribe, Faithful. Mariah does a great job with her channel as well, so I want to make sure I shouted that out to start off the show tonight, kick it off. You look at the 49ers, where they are, though, like I said, they've made a bunch of moves and kicked it right off day one of the it wasn't the actual beginning of free agency in terms of the official beginning of free agency, but that early tampering period on Monday of last week. 49ers kicked it right off, agreeing to terms with defensive tackle Javon Hargrave of the Philadelphia Eagles. They kind of have been rolling through since then. They've signed 6 new players to the team, brought back 8 others from last year's roster. So they've done a lot so far. And I wanted to start off by asking you, have the 49ers improved during free agency to this point?
Oh, this one's tough, Jack. I know, like, just a couple days into the legal tampering period, I had put out a video saying, to this point, they haven't. They've actually taken a step back, and it was very early into free agency. I would say right now, probably a wash. It's close. They've improved in some areas. They've gotten worse in others. We can go step by step. I would say, obviously, Javon Hargrave puts them at a plus, like if you're looking at a plus minus, gives them a plus as far as the defensive line goes. I would say losing Azeez Al-Shaair puts them at a slight negative when it comes to the linebackers. And then secondary, you lost Mosley and Ward. You've added some pieces there, but I would say a slight step back there. And then, offensive line, you lost Mike McGlinchey. Everybody else is pretty much the same. And Mike McGlinchey, I know, is not a fan favorite, but he is better than, I would say, Colton McKivitz, at least what we know so far. And so, I would say slight, maybe even or a slight step down, but it's not far off. It's just they've gotten better in some areas. And then, it's tough because all of this is on paper and we don't know, who's going to step up, how big of an impact they have. Even the players that played last year, the names can be the same, but they might be better or worse. So it's really tough to say at this point. But on paper, I would say, right there, maybe a slight step back.
Yeah, I look at it and I think that they've improved overall. I can understand if you're looking at this roster right now. You look at the offense and defensive from the starters as far as the guys who started. 19 of the 22 starters from the NFC Championship game are returning. On offense, the only loss is McGlinchey. On defense, the only loss is Samson Ebukam at left end and opposite of Nick Bosa, and then Azeez Al-Shaair going to the Tennessee Titans. Jimmy Ward, I understand he's a loss. It depends on if you want to characterize it. He didn't start the NFC Championship game, so the nickel starts sometimes. Some just depends on the way they flow. I look at this roster and I think that for the most part, I think the defense, quite frankly, starting defense in of itself has definitely improved. I think the starting defense today is better than the starting defense that took the field in Philadelphia. You look at, I understand the loss of Emmanuel Mosley, but Mosley, he only played 5 games. So we saw them go on majority of their season when they were winning games, when they had their long win streak, getting to the championship game and so on. He wasn't a part of that. So you look at the guys that they lost. And the one thing that I will say on that is it seems like the majority of the players they lost are guys who dealt with injuries throughout their time with the 49ers or last year as well. I think I added up at one point, there was I think they lost 6 guys. And of those 6, it was a total of 33 games that were lost during last season. Garoppolo and some of these other guys. So I think overall their starters they're in a really good spot. I think the majority of their talent is still here, and now they're having to rebuild, and we're seeing them doing that with kind of a similar pattern to what we've seen in years past.
Yeah, I don't think they've deviated from what I would say we would expect to this point, right? I don't think there's a much deviation going on there. Like I said, it's so hard though, Jack, because we can say on paper one thing or another, but you don't know who's going to step up next year. Does
Sure.
Drake Jackson take a leap? Offensive line, let's operate under the assumption that McKivitz is starting. He's worse than McGlinchey, sure. But does Brendel take a step forward? Does Burford take a step forward to kind of offset that down tick over right tackle? There's just so many unknowns. And, depth wise, how do some of these pieces fit in versus the pieces that were there last year? I could see somebody like Gibson not necessarily falling off of a cliff, but playing worse than he did last year, maybe even Hufanga. So there's so many variables that go into this thing. And, they're also going to get good depth through the draft as well. I mean, as of now, they've got 11 picks. That's, you can do a lot of damage with 11 picks, regardless of where they're at. And the 49ers draft well late. So I'm very interested to see how they round it out and how they finish free agency. So there's a lot left. There's a lot that goes into this. And so far, I would say according to plan for the most part.
Yeah, and it's hard to say necessarily. I mean, you're taking the approach of the possibility of guys stepping back, and so I understand that. That could be an issue. We'll see. You mentioned the starting offensive line for just to touch on that, because there was some movement that was made yesterday. You look at it right now as it stands, 4 of the 5 starters are returning, so that's a benefit that's different from last year. Last year we had no clue, other than Trent Williams, what was happening up there, because even McGlinchey was coming back from a tough injury, so we didn't know where he was. But yesterday, the 49ers went out and they brought in John Feliciano, who is a guy that can do a lot. It's somebody that I really thought the 49ers should go after a couple of years ago in free agency. He ended up staying in Buffalo, but he has the ability to play across the offensive line. He could play. He started a lot of games at right guard. He started a lot of games at left guard. He started all of last season at center for the Giants. He can kind of play across the board. And it's interesting that you bring him in when you have Spencer Burford there, who started almost all of the games last year. Do you think that bringing in Feliciano might be a sign that they're going to move Spencer Burford out to right tackle?
Oh, man. I think there's so many possibilities. It's interesting because there was an interview from Feliciano about a year ago. And the reason I know about this interview is because it was done by a gentleman by the name of Ariel Helwani, who is like the #1 MMA journalist. And he dabbled a little bit into all sports and had Feliciano on. It was an interesting interview, but he talked in that interview saying that his best position he believed was center. And then it would be right guard and then left guard. So if he's putting it in order, he thinks he would be a better center than anything. I do think it definitely gives them room to do so. It also gives them room to just say, hey, you can play the Brunskill role where you're the backup, but you're the first guy off the bench and you can play almost all these positions. Burford did play mostly tackle in college, and he did the same thing coming out of high school. He was a very good left tackle his senior year. I think he went all conference at left tackle. So yeah, I think the possibility is there. I almost think his athleticism and stature fits better at tackle, but that doesn't mean that that's the way the 49ers see it. So I am curious to see what they do. I think that it does open things up, and I personally would feel more comfortable if they moved him over and probably plugged Feliciano into the right guard spot. I think that's a better option, in my opinion, than going with McKivitz and then Feliciano, the first guy off the bench. But, maybe the 49ers see it different and they see these guys every day. And so they have a difference of opinion on how that will play out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had this comment here from Mr. 559, and he says competition at right guard will be beneficial for Burford's growth. And I agree here. We saw this last year, and that's why
Yeah.
it's a little interesting to me here what they decide to do, because Spencer Burford didn't play. It's not like he was plugged in at right guard and he played all the snaps. He played the snaps until Daniel Brunskill came back, and then there was a big rotation between those two. So is Spencer Burford a guy that the 49ers really want to see play there? Or, do they feel as good about him as a right guard or even as a right tackle as people would expect based on the fact that he stepped right into the starting lineup last year, part of that due to Brunskill's injury? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, and one thing we do know is the 49ers and Shanahan himself loves competition. Feliciano saying that he's the best at center, he might be competing for both spots. I mean, last year in camp, we saw Brunskill take center snaps, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were there, but didn't Brunskill miss a big part of camp when he started to kind of come on a little bit and maybe show that he could potentially play center? I felt like that's how I remember that happening, but I could be wrong.
He did miss some camp, but I don't know if it was one of those situations where he was ever really pushing Brendel as far as the center. I know they were rotating a little bit in there, so there could be a little bit of pushing that was going on, because there definitely was. There was some rotation that was going on there. But one of the big problems for Brunskill at center was he was having a hard time with the snaps.
Yeah,
from what I recall.
I remember he was staying after practice a lot. Now I remember. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't. The Feliciano deal was an interesting one, because it's like, where do they fit? How are the 49ers going to be jumbling everything around? And again, there's been a lot of chatter around the possibility of them bringing in, going after a tackle early in the draft, or maybe early in the third, maybe trading up to get it earlier in the third round or something like that for a guy in the draft. The tackle out of BYU is one that his name's been popping up all over 49ers community with, as far as a potential lock there. So we'll see what happens. But definitely the Feliciano thing, I think, kind of makes you wonder what's going to happen with this offensive line. Let's just take a step back, though. We jumped into the Feliciano thing, but what about the Javon Hargrave signing? I really like that one, and I wanted to get your thoughts on Javon Hargrave to the 49ers. Again, that came up last Monday, so just want to get your thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic signing, first and foremost. I mean, you're talking about a very good player. And when the contract came out initially, you're like, oh, man, you just paid a 30-year-old an awful lot of money. But once the full contract details came out, you're like, okay, this actually is not the worst contract in the world. It's essentially a 2-year deal. You can get out of it after 2 years. And I know we talked a little bit on Twitter about, what the ramifications of that would be, but it wouldn't be the end of the world necessarily. So, yeah, I think it was a good deal overall. Definitely an exciting signing. Very, very good player. And then best of all, you take a major piece from the team that was better than you last year in the NFC Championship, and you make them weaker at the same time. So I think it was a complete win-win. And, the 49ers, this is what they like to do. They like to have dominant defensive lines. I would say last year, even though they had a lot of depth, it was not the most dominant defensive line that we've seen. It's certainly not in this era. And I think Hargrave helps them get back to what they want to do, and that's what their roots are.
I agree. I think when you have Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead in the middle, and then Nick Bosa on the outside, that gets you back closer to what they had in 2019 when DeForest Buckner was inside. And then I'm not going to rehash the whole fact that they it seems like they're making up for a mistake here with what they did with Buckner. But this is a really good deal, because now if Eric Armstead's healthy, and if everybody plays to their capability along that defensive line, you've got Hargrave, Armstead, and Bosa, who all play around 70 to 75% of the snaps. So I know we talk a lot about the depth of the defensive line, but those guys on that the guys on that side aren't going to have to rotate maybe quite as much as they have in the past, because they have 3 down guys in Hargrave and Armstead and Bosa. It's really the opposite, the guy opposite of Bosa, who we're going to have to find out what they decide to do there. So it's a really good defensive line. And you look at what Jedi says here. He says if Jackson comes on, and again, Jackson's a part of it. And then the other piece there is, they went out and they brought in, they like you said earlier, they do this all the time. They went out and they found a reclamation project for Chris Kosarick to work with, bringing in Clellan Farrell from the Raiders. And that's another one. We'll see if he can make that move, because that could be a split between Jackson and Farrell over there, and Farrell's a heck of a run defender. So it'll be interesting to see how that group comes together.
Yeah, I'm curious too. And they don't necessarily have to be done there. They can get somebody in the draft. There's still some free agents out there. So we'll see. We'll see how this thing plays out. But yeah, Jackson's certainly one of those guys that can come on in year two. I mean, we see it every year, Jack. There's multiple players that we see every year. Last year it was Hafunga, Banks, Lenore. I mean, we see these leaps. So I would expect that there's at least 2, 3 guys that kind of make that leap this year. And regardless of who it is, whether it's a Jackson or a Burford or Brindell. I know it's technically not his second year in the league, but you know what I mean? It's his second year starting.
Yeah.
Poe, Zakel, Gray. I mean, Davis. There's an endless number of possibilities here. And if any combination of the 3 pop, like, yeah, I mean, that's a great thing. And you're going to get some awesome depth in an area that you didn't necessarily expect, or a crazy good starter that you didn't necessarily expect. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we talked about that up front, and I definitely think that defensive line right now, even if it's Drake Jackson as your starting defensive end opposite of Bosa, I think that defensive line is better. You added sacks to that group. You only lost a net of 2. You gained they only lost between Jackson and Samson Ebukam. They only lost 2 sacks, and they picked up a bunch more from the signing of Hargrave there. And then the other move that they made that I thought was a really good one on that defensive side was bringing in Isaiah Oliver. I think this guy gives them a better guy in the slot when it comes to coverage ability. What were kind of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love the Isaiah Oliver signing. I remember the year he came out, he came out of Colorado. He was my number 3 corner in that draft. And, he had a torn ACL a couple years back, but he's a versatile corner. He's long, he's lean, he's very athletic, very underrated athlete. I mean, you go check his combine numbers. He can jump through the roof, fast player. Like I said, long arms. I mean, he really is a versatile player. And you plug him in on this defense with all the weapons around, you could see him take a leap for sure, especially playing under a guy like Wilkes, who this is his specialty, is coaching guys like this up in the secondary. So I love the Isaiah Oliver signing. And it came on the heels of losing both Ward, and then you lost Mosley. It was like, oh gosh, what are they going to do? Who's out there? You start to kind of think through like all the pieces that are available, and here comes Oliver. And I think it was a fantastic signing. That is one I'm definitely excited about.
Yeah, same here. I think that's a really good one. And you mentioned a lot of all those reasons. You look at the film, and he does a good job in the run game as well as in coverage. A guy who really struggled his first couple of years in the league playing on the outside, and once Atlanta decided to move him in, he really started to take off. And then another one really quick, and this Raymond is mentioned it here. He wants to know, is Oliver going to get some looks at free safety? My answer to that would be he might get a couple. I wouldn't expect to see Oliver be a big piece at free safety. I think that's more along the lines of where the other signing that they made in the secondary, Miles Hartsfield, I think he comes along more in that free safety role. You look at where the 49ers are right now. Hartsfield, not somebody that was on any 49ers fans' radar before Saturday when the 49ers made that move. But at the same time, this is a guy who's played in the slot. He has played safety. He's actually played more safety than anywhere else the last couple of years. Big special teams guy. So I think you might see of the guys that they've brought in so far, I would say that you're going to see Hartsfield get more of a look at free safety than Oliver.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think that fits his skill set necessarily. We'll see. We'll see what they do. But I think Oliver, it's going to be fun. Between him and Womack, we're going to have an interesting battle at that nickel spot. I'll say that.
For sure. And I think with Oliver, I think he had just a handful of snaps at free safety for the Falcons. So I think that might be where it's coming up.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Really quick on that Hartsfield deal, that's a replacement. When I look at Hartsfield and that addition, I see him as a replacement for Tarvarius Moore. So the Flyers lost Tarvarius Moore. They bring in Hartsfield, very similar in terms of where they've played, the things that they can bring to the team. So if you're looking for that free safety spot and how they're going to address that, at least for now, Hartsfield would be that piece. And we're going to talk about where they're going to go forward. But I would say Hartsfield is is Tarvarius Moore's replacement as a depth piece in the secondary, can play multiple places, including safety, which Moore did for the 49ers.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And then, I would assume that they address some of that maybe in the draft as well. We thought, I know a lot of us thought last year that they would go safety in the draft at some point. We thought that there were some good ones there in round 3. They decided to go TDP, much to the dismay of a lot of us. And, we'll see what they do this year. But I imagine that safety is a position that they'll eventually target somewhere in this draft.
Yeah, for sure. I think so too. That's one of the fun things about the way the 49ers do this is that they go and they plug all their holes, right? So they kind of plug all the holes. They don't really leave themselves a gaping spot for you to say, well, this is where they're going round 1, or with their first pick or whatever, with the exception of 2021 when you knew they were going quarterback. But most of the time they do a pretty good job of keeping it close to the vest in terms of where they're going to go there. One signing that we haven't touched base on, we've done all the defensive guys. We talked a little bit about Feliciano, but we haven't touched on the new 49ers quarterback, Sam Darnold. Wanted to get your thoughts on the addition of Sam Darnold to the 49ers and what you think he brings.
Yeah, I think the Sam Darnold signing was really good. I mean, it's funny because we had all these conversations about, how we would want Mariota, or there was a bunch of guys that were thrown around. And realistically, these guys are all backup caliber quarterbacks. To get them to come in and possibly play third string, but maybe fight for a backup spot, it'd be hard to talk these guys into it. And two guys that I thought you might be able to talk into it just because they've taken a downturn in their career was Sam Darnold and Carson Wentz. And they ended up getting Sam Darnold, who is somebody that Kyle Shanahan has liked for a while. I know that they gave him quite a bit of money, especially for a third string quarterback, but I think Sam Darnold probably could have went to 10 to 15 other teams and been a backup. And so I think if you're going to get a backup quality quarterback to potentially be the third string guy, you have to pay him like he's a backup. I think that's only fair. You add that in with what the 49ers are committed to at the other quarterback positions. I mean, they're still less than Jimmy Garoppolo is this year against the books, I would say, for all three. So that's a great thing right there. And then, he brings some experience. I also think that he can help, both Trey Lance and Brock Purdy from a standpoint that he's gone through the rough patches, and especially Trey Lance. I mean, being a top overall pick, all these expectations, he did it in New York, which was a much tougher market. And I think that he can kind of be that guy that you can rely on, or Trey can rely on, like, hey, I'm dealing with this. This is really tough. I'm in year 3. How did you do it? What were some of the things that you did to block the noise out, type of thing? And I think he can be very helpful there. I know a lot of people are looking at him and saying, hey, he might be able to compete for the starting job. Maybe. I mean, I'm sure, like, we just talked about it with Shanahan. Shanahan loves competition. But I think realistically, we pretty much know what Sam Darnold is. I would be shocked if he starts at any time, barring injury to both the other two quarterbacks. And I think it's a great depth piece, though.
Yeah, he's definitely a good depth piece. I think I put an article out Friday, I think it was, kind of just taking an overall look at the 49ers quarterback position, because there have been a lot of conversations. Was he brought in to compete for the starting job? Is he going to take Lance's job? Is he going to take Purdy's job? This means Purdy's injured. The addition of, however anybody wants to phrase it, and how they want to take it, bringing in Sam Darnold's a hedge at the quarterback position for the 49ers. Doesn't mean that, right now you look at it and you have Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, they're both still injured. I know Lance is supposed to come back and he's supposed to be cleared in time for OTAs and on-field work, but he's working himself back. So, but he's been injured. You're not sure what's going to happen there. He's been injured 3 times in 2 years. Brock Purdy, you don't know when he's going to come back exactly. Right now, it's looking at, they say 6 months, which is right before the season starts. We don't know if it's going to be shorter or longer. Just have no idea. But I do think it's a hedge, and it's going to be, I think it makes it for a fun offseason. Again, I think there's going to be a competition here between Lance. Lance and Darnold if Purdy's not there. And the reason I say that is, you go back, listen to what's been said all offseason. Just take yourself back to the week of the Super Bowl. They talked to Brock Purdy. They talked to Trey Lance. What did both of those guys say? They both talked about wanting to compete, just wanting to compete. He didn't come out and necessarily say it in his interview with the media last week, Sam Darnold, but you can, at least to me, it sounds like he's a guy who wants to come in here and prove himself. And so to me, that means he wants to come in and compete. He thinks he's going to come try to push, and whether he's able to get the deal done or he ends up as the backup, it's all about trying to improve himself. I think it's a good deal. And then on top of that, you got 3 quarterbacks here who take up just over $14 million in cap space. They'll compare that to everybody else in the NFL, and you got your whole quarterback room there. I think the Flyers are going to add somebody in the quarterback room as well. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how this whole thing plays out. Now, is Darnold what's he going to be? I don't know. The only thing, you mentioned it. Only thing I know is this isn't the Jets. He's not dealing with Adam Gase. He's not in Carolina dealing with Matt Rule and Joe Brady and all that stuff. So we'll see what ends up happening with him and if he can maybe show something that we haven't seen so far.
Yeah, I think what you're going to get from him with these weapons around, I don't think there's any doubt that he could play his best ball. I just think Sam Darnold is very Jimmy Garoppolo in the sense that he's turnover prone. And I think he's been that regardless. I think he's still going to be that. And, but I do agree with the hedge. And I think it's a hedge from multiple standpoints. I think it's a hedge from an injury standpoint of Brock Purdy. Because like you said, 6 months sounds great. But if it turns into 7, you probably need somebody. So I think it's a hedge there. And if, Brock Purdy is out for 6-8 weeks for whatever reason, and Trey Lance starts 0-4 and just is showing nothing at all, then yeah, you've got somebody that you can bring in. So I think it is a hedge from that standpoint for sure.
Yeah. So we'll see where it goes. And then really quick, this is off of our main topic here, but this is one that's been going around, and put this out yesterday, and I put it out a couple of times. And Mr. 559 wants to know, salary wise, how can you afford Lamar Jackson, Nick Bosa, and Brandon Ayuk? And I'm glad you asked the question, because that's one of the things a lot of people talk about. You look at the numbers, and yes, Lamar Jackson's going to be expensive. Any top level quarterback is going to be expensive. Can the 49ers fit him in with Bosa and Ayuk, say, this year? Absolutely, they can. You look at these deals, and year one, you get a minimum salary contract with your signing bonus. Doesn't matter after that, because the next year you can restructure however you redo the deal. Look at what the Cleveland Browns did with Deshaun Watson, right? Deshaun Watson was like $9.4 million against the cap in year one. He's like $15 million against the cap in year two. The 49ers can work it out with Lamar. If they want him to be their quarterback, if that's really what they want to do, they can move money around. They've done it in the past. They did it with Steve Young, and they did it with Jeff Garcia back in the day when they were actually, winning Super Bowls and things like that. So we'll see what they decide to do here.
I think a couple things. The more guaranteed money you have, the more you can offset, which is great, because Lamar wants a lot of guaranteed money. It sounds like not all guaranteed, but he's going to want a lot of guaranteed money. And so when you restructure, which, by the way, this is something that I think a lot of people haven't talked about. You get a Lamar Jackson and you sign him to a mega 5-year deal. You're probably going to be able to restructure that thing 3 or 4 times comfortably, knowing that he's your guy for the next 10 years and not worry about it, much like the Chiefs have been able to do with Patrick Mahomes and will continue to do with Patrick Mahomes. The other thing is this. I also don't think you're going to have to worry about it, Mr. 559, because if Jackson comes, I would imagine Bosa or Ayuk are also going to be going back to Baltimore. You're not going to get Lamar Jackson for nothing. They're going to want some pieces. Ayuk and Bosa are big pieces. I would be shocked if you brought Lamar Jackson onto this team without either one of them making their way to Baltimore.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it as well. I put that in the article that I wrote yesterday, that maybe, if they're not going to take the picks and Lance, you would have to maybe send a Bosa. I think as crazy as that might sound, Bosa is a terrific defensive player, but defensive players don't usually win championships. It's usually quarterbacks, especially high caliber quarterbacks that are winning the Super Bowl. You might get there with one that's not, but it's to win it, you need one. But you can make these numbers work. You really can. And we'll see what happens. Lamar Jackson, according to the reports, wants out of he's done with the Ravens. He wants to get out. It's going to be up to the Ravens what they decide to do, if they want to match it or whatever. The only way he comes to San Francisco, I see, would be if it's a sign and trade kind of a thing where, he can't. The 49ers don't have the first round picks to make it work right now. But if he signs his franchise tag deal, then at that point he becomes property of the Ravens, right? He's a member of their team, so now they can trade him for whatever they want, and so that's the way that this deal would have to work out. So we'll see. It can be done prior to, contrary to popular belief, because I see a lot of people saying that it can't be done. It really can be done. It's just a matter of putting the numbers in there. And what you talked about is, again, that's how the 49ers structure their deals. Is they have a modest amount of signing bonus built in up front. I think they talk to these guys and they say, look, you work with us and you're going to get your money. Look at like a guy like, for example, the Javon Hargrave deal. He's getting $40 million over these next 2 years. He's probably going to get a bump in year 3. If he does really well, they could restructure his deal because he has so much base compared to his signing bonus, his bonus money, that there's a lot of work and there's a lot of room in between that you can use to cut that down. So we'll see the action they take there, but the 49ers definitely in a good spot in terms of their salary structure, and there's guys that they can go to right now to save some money if they wanted to anyway. So they got about $40 million they could play with if they want to max out their savings against the cap. So kind of taking a look at what they've done. We know we didn't even touch on the re-signings, but when you look at the 49ers right now, Jesse, what are the holes left that you think the 49ers need to fill?
Yeah, I mean, I think they still need to add depth in the secondary. I mean, we talked about safety spot. They're going to need another safety on this roster, I believe. You're probably going to need to add another corner that can play on the outside. We don't know what Ambry Thomas is or isn't. We don't know about like Quantrez Knight, like what they think about him. So I would imagine another corner. And then, the glaring things that we talk about are right tackle. Again, a lot of that depends on what they do think of Burford or McKivitz. Are they comfortable with either one of them playing right tackle? I think a lot of it comes down to that. But looking at it from the outside in, we would say, okay, probably right tackle. And then they do need some depth at defensive end as well. I mean, that's one thing that we can say for certain is they lost a lot of depth, especially on the exterior of that defensive line. And so I think that they're going to have to fill that one way or another. And there's so many different ways to go about it. You just talked about it. They still have multiple contracts that they can restructure that don't even have to get into the ones that, I said don't touch, which are like the Armsteads, the Kittles, and the Trent Williams. They could still rework CMCs once they extend Bosa. If they don't trade him for Lamar, by the way, once they extend Bosa, then that's more money that they free up. So they have money there waiting to play with if they so choose. And so they can go after, even like a Yannick Ngakoue, I know is popular. A lot of people want him. We've talked about Justin Houston and what's his name? Quinn from the Eagles. He was with the Bears a couple years ago. So there's some depth pieces, veteran pieces they can add, or they can just simply do it through the draft with their 11 picks and however they want to go about that. But yeah, there's definitely some spots that I think need to be filled for sure. What about you?
Yeah, you look at it right now, there's 62 players on the roster. So they've still got a long ways to go here. So, 90 players are going to show up to training camp. I think it might even be 91 because they have the one player, the offensive line, Alfredo Gutierrez. I think that actually allows them to carry 91 players because of that. And there's other teams across the league that have the international players on their roster as well. But right now they're at 62, so they have plenty. And I agree with you. I think their number one need now is there's two, but number one I would say is defensive end. I like, you look at their roster the way it's set up right now. They only have 3 defensive tackles under contract in terms of guys who played for them last year. They do have was on the practice squad last year. They have Alex Barrett, who they could pull up. That would be their 4th. But right now they only have 3. It's Jackson, Bosa, and Farrell. So I think you look at it, and one of their biggest needs is to go out and get themselves a defensive end. Now, whether they do that in the draft or in free agency, I mean, Yannick Ngakoue is a guy who, for me, he makes too much sense because he has shown the ability to play well in the wide nine, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I like that one. It's odd to me that they let Jordan Willis walk out the door. If they weren't going to kind of make a move at that spot, a guy like Willis would have made a lot of sense because Willis comes in, he fills the position, he can play special teams. He's only about $6-8 million against the cap or whatever. Would have made total sense, but they didn't go in that direction. So I think they need to add a defensive end there. The other big position they need to add is a tight end. Right now they have three because brought back Ross Dwelly yesterday. So now they have at least now they have two tight ends that can catch. Before yesterday, they only had one. So now they have two, and they're going to have to add people there. I think that's a spot where, Austin Hooper is a name that I've mentioned in the past. I know it's a deep draft at tight end as well, but I do think they should bring in one more veteran player as well as bringing in a rookie. They carried 4 last year on their roster. They only carried 3 out of training camp, but that quickly went to 4 after the injuries and things like that got accounted for. So I would like to see them bring in, again, a higher level tight end and then go ahead and poach one in the draft. And you could do the same thing on the offensive line at right tackle and so on.
Position we didn't talk about, kind of forgotten, is they don't have a kicker either. They need a kicker, right? So
yeah,
how do they do that? Do they bring back Gold? Do they bring in like a Pinheiro? Do they draft a Moody? I'm curious to see what they do there, but yeah, kicker is pretty important, and somehow we both glossed over that one.
Yeah, we did, and that's a spot where I wouldn't, if they don't trade up, if they decide that they want to sit and take 3 picks at the end of the 3rd round or what have you, I wouldn't mind them taking a guy like, Moody hit a 60-yarder, I believe it was, during the college football playoffs. Well, that's a leg the 49ers haven't had in a long time. And it's just a matter of, is he consistent enough to be able to replace Gold? I think when you look at the kicker position, the only thing that you worry about is how's he going to perform in the playoffs? Because, Gold's been money in the playoffs. Having a young guy or even a Pinheiro, you would be thinking a little bit on that one because the 49ers typically tend to kick a lot of field goals, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the unfortunate thing is you don't know. You could have a kicker play well all season long. Then he gets to the playoffs and they get the yips like Dallas's kicker. So you never know what's going to happen with these guys.
Well, heck, look back to 2019, right? Remember in 2019, Gold got hurt, and so he was out. The 49ers are still winning. That's how they lost their first game of the season. Remember, as they had McLaughlin, Chase McLaughlin, I think is what his name was, and he had been really good up until that Seattle game, and they put him out there to kick the game winner against Seattle. And not only does he miss it, he kicks it into the tunnel. So, and if you've been to Levi Stadium, that tunnel is not close to the field goal. So that's how bad that thing was missed. So it's an important position. It's one that everybody, we just glossed over it, but it's definitely, I would say, a big question mark. There's a lot of kickers out there though. And I think the 49ers, they definitely have to make a decision. Do they want to go with a vet here or do they want to go rookie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you, by the way. If it comes down to drafting a kicker with one of those compensatory picks in round 3, I have no issue doing that.
Yeah, same here. And then the other thing too is you look at, looking at it, I would say, safety is another spot that they need to add. Safety and cornerback as well. Right now, they're kind of on the low end of that. Like I said, if you look at it right now, you have Lenore and Ward. They're probably your starters. I would pencil in Oliver as the starter at the nickel. And then their backups, all they have is Ambry Thomas and Samuel Womack right now as far as cornerbacks go. Hartsfield can play a little bit there from time to time, but still, that's not much. And you look at what they're bringing back from their practice squad and the reserves kind of guys, AJ Parker, Quantrez Knight, Taylor Hawkins, Trace Willing. None of those names really jump out to you as guys that you'd want to have rolling in. So again, whether they do that through free agency or they're bringing in those guys in the draft, that's another spot to look at. I mean, really everything other than quarterback, I think right now is open in terms of free agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what will make the draft interesting as well, depending on how many of those spots are still open and up for grabs.
Yeah, because you go back and I don't have the roster in front of me from preseason last year, but typically they have, at least last year they had 3 teams, 1, 2, 3 because they didn't have a fourth quarterback. So usually, they're going to have 3 centers, got to have 3 guards at each spot, 3 tackles. So they're going to have 15 offensive linemen when they hit camp. You're going to want to have like 5 or 6 maybe tight ends. They'll add a couple of running backs here at some point. A spot that also to look at where they may add a guy because he can be a developmental piece is fullback, because Kyle Juszczyk's getting a little older. They had one that they were kind of working with there for a little bit. They lost him this year, so that might be something that they take a look at there as well, as adding a fullback to their roster.
Yeah, well, and then there's the fullback. I don't know if you saw, but there's a fullback coming out that put up a perfect score on the RAS. So he's like the freak athlete, and he happens to play fullback. So yeah, who knows? Shanahan might fall in love with a guy like that as well.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe they just decide that, Jason Poe's going to be our fullback. Maybe that's what they do.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about it.
That's the one that everybody was excited about last year was Jason Poe. He was kind of the top dog in terms of the guys that were brought in as the undrafted free agents. A lot of people liked him. So who knows? I mean, it's an interesting one. Quarterback, I do think they'll add a quarterback in the draft there as well. One last thing, kind of what's coming up next for the 49ers. Right now we're in the middle of free agency, but there's something that's coming up next week that's I think is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. The owners meeting. Last year there were some really good sound bites that came out of that. What are you looking forward to next week when the owners meeting hits?
Just Shanahan talking, because Shanahan always spills the beans on whatever, no matter what. And it was interesting because a lot of people felt like cryptic messages came out of last year's owners meetings. And I remember very clearly, Jack, like this is one thing that we agreed on immediately, which is rare, by the way. But we immediately agreed that he was saying that Trey Lance was the starting quarterback. We're like, it's obvious. Like, how do you listen to that and think anything other than that? And so a lot of people are like, oh, Jimmy's still here. And there was a whole bunch of weird things coming out of it. But we were steadfast that he basically said as much as he can say without just outright saying it, that Trey Lance is our starter. And, all be done. Like that was exactly what happened. So I'm curious to see just what Shanahan says at all, because he always ends up giving you more than what you expect. Much different than John Lynch. If John Lynch was able to go through the whole offseason to be a bunch of buttoned up talk, you wouldn't get a lot. But when Shanahan speaks, he will usually give you just a little bit extra. And we'll see. I mean, maybe it's around the quarterback position. Maybe it's around something else. But Shanahan will give us some sound bites for sure that we can analyze.
Yeah, there's always something with him that comes up that you can kind of pick and choose. Last year, you're right. The deal with the quarterback, I mean, he was pretty straightforward with that, because they were asking him about Garoppolo and Lance. He's like, well, there's a reason why we tried to trade Jimmy. We're pretty happy with Trey. We think that we can go forward with him. And, then you start to hear after like in August, like some of the comments that he made to Albert Breer and stuff like that. So it really kind of gave you a good idea of where he was on Lance. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out. I think if the injury to Purdy doesn't happen in Philadelphia, I think it's a pretty clear cut discussion as far as where the quarterback situation. I think it's a competition. I think you go into it with Purdy as the leader in the clubhouse, with Lance right there, and they're competing for it. But I saw some people talking about this on Twitter last week about how, there's not really there's really no competitions in the NFL. If you think that there's competitions, you're the kind of person who thinks that everything has to be earned and blah, 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 blah. When you're looking at a competition, like when I say there's going to be a competition between Lance and Darnold, right? If Purdy's not there, I'm not saying that they're on even playing field. What I'm saying is there's going to be a competition. You probably go into that competition with Lance right here and Darnold down here. But then based on how they play, maybe there's some adjustment as they go through, just like back in 2021, right? They started that off. Garoppolo was here. Lance was here. At one point, I think it was like going like this, and then it slowly went like this as camp went through and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to it. As far as the owners meeting go, I'm pretty sure we're going to hear from Kyle Shanahan as something along the lines of how much he likes both guys and how you can't tell them because who knows, we might not all be alive next week or something like that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm also curious to see like what rule changes come out of it. I know a couple of the ones that were proposed, at least were like the rugby scrum deal that Philly does. Are they going to look to take that away? The one that I was really intrigued by actually was being able to challenge roughing the passer plays. I thought that was interesting, and I think it should. Honestly, I think all penalties should be challengeable. If you get 2 challenges, you want to challenge something, you should be able to challenge anything. But I think that's a good start, and it starts to open the door up for other things if, in fact, they do approve that one. And I think that one would be great, a great start, because we've seen some really, really bad calls when it comes to roughing the passer.
Well, I think, shocker, I agree with you here on this one, in that if you're going to allow 2 challenges per half or however, whatever it is,
yeah,
it's everything. It's free game. You can choose. You can choose. Why are you limited to anything? If you're going to allow a team to challenge, allow them to challenge everything. Let them challenge everything. As far as the rugby scrum thing that the Eagles are doing, I think from a strategic standpoint, I have no problem with it. I think if there's a change there, it would have to be because of an injury or a health standpoint. I don't think it should be coming from a strategic kind of standpoint, because, hey, if we're going to line up and you can't stop us, that's not our problem. That's yours. I don't care if you don't think that it looks good.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, yeah, it doesn't, it's not the prettiest thing or whatever, but I mean, it is what it is. Like you should be able to do. It's not outside of the rule set, So that's where I have the issue. It's like, this is well within the rules. We're not doing anything crazy here. Why change that of all things? I mean, are we just going to stop quarterback sneaks from happening at all? Is it their fault that their offensive linemen get lower for leverage? I mean, how do you decipher between the two? I don't know. I think that's a weird one to go after, but the challenging, I would love to see that one.
You know what I would like to see? I would like to see them do something along the lines of what the XFL's done, in terms of, they don't kick extra points. They have to actually score, put in the end zone. It's like a 2-point conversion, but you're choosing different, depending on how many points you want, you're going to run the play from a different point on the, this isn't something I don't think that's up there, but that would be an awesome one, I think, because it totally changes the way the game's played. If you can score a touchdown, then go from 3 by scoring from the 15, that totally changes the way that you're battling. You're calculating the points. How do you get there, and those kind of things. That would be a lot of fun. Same thing with their onside kick rule. Instead of getting an onside kick, you get the ball and you have to convert from, I think it's like a 4th and 15 type of thing or whatever it is. And that's a really good one as well. I mean, you look at
they actually have some good rules over there. Their kickoffs, Jack, I really enjoy as well. I don't know if you paid attention to those, but they basically line them up 10 yards apart. They kick the ball and then they go. I think it's a safe way to go about it. I don't know. I like what a lot of what the XFL has done with some of these rule tweaks, and I would like to see also the NFL adopt some of these eventually, because I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, and it's happened in the past. We've seen rules from these other leagues become changes for the NFL. I think that those would be a good one. And as Ian points out, hey man, you're not helping Robbie's contract over here.
For sure.
I mean, that's the thing, right? The kicker is the kicker, especially on the kickoff thing that they do in the XFL. I like it. It does kind of with the way they do the extra points, it does kind of take a little bit of the kicker out of the game. But who needs to see a kicker go out there, especially some of these guys that are out there? Most of them are pretty fit now, but every once in a while you get a guy that's not quite so much.
I disagree. I think we're helping Robbie Gould because of the kickoff rule. If that's adopted, at least he'll be able to get the ball down near the end zone.
There you go. It might help out his coverage units a little bit. So
yeah,
we'll see how that goes. Was there anything else you want to hit on real quick before we bounce out for the night?
No, I think we're good, man. I think it was a good show. I'm glad to be back, and we'll definitely hit it again next week. We'll see what comes. I mean, that's what's great. The show being on Tuesday, we'll have the owner meeting, and hopefully we'll get some sound bites out of that, and we'll have a good conversation next week.
Yeah, and we'll get a chance to take a look at maybe some more 49ers joining the team and all those type of things. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully you guys got something out of tonight in terms of what they're going to have to do moving forward, and a little bit out of where they are now. if you guys can do me a favor, keep it locked in here to Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. Make sure you get over to Jesse's channel, Last Second Sports, as well. We had a little bit of a hiccup on the channel. Talked about that last week. We'll see what happens moving forward. Got a little bit of tweaks that we're going to have to do to the channel, or I'm going to try to do to even bring you guys better content. So keep it locked in here, as we'll get all you guys the breaking news as it happens, and the updates and the rumors and all that kind of stuff as well. So check it out. Keep it locked in. If you guys can do me a favor, hit the like button before you head out tonight, and hit the subscribe button as well. And when you hit subscribe, hit the little bell notification so you know when we go live, so that you don't miss any of the content that comes up. Jesse, thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely, brother. We'll see you next week.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks to everybody in the comment section and for watching. We'll be checking you out. Like I said, keep it locked in here to Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Take care.